Today, we're going to be talking about a central idea. In English 9A, we are going to be reading a lot of narrative fiction, and we're also going to be working on our own memoir and reading some memoir narrative. So we're going to talk about how to determine central idea in a text throughout the course. So we're going to start off today by looking at some strategies for pre-reading and during reading and post-reading that can help us determine a central idea in a text and then identify details to help us support that concept or that idea that we've come up with. So we're going to focus on that today. So what you're going to do for me in your quiz is you're going to respond to some of the questions that I'm asking throughout the course now, and then you're also going to complete an activity at the end for credit. So you can see I put the objective up there on the board, and I've already explained that to you, to be able to determine central idea in a text and identify two supporting details. Secondly, I have two things listed: the strategies for pre-reading and the strategies for doing/post-reading. Now, I want you to think to yourself, when you're assigned, not when you read for entertainment or for yourself, but when you're assigned something to read for school, what is it that you do? What process do you go through? Do you just pick it up and read it? Do you flip through it to see how long it is? Do you look to see if there are any pictures? Do you read the title? What's your process? And if you do just pick it up and read it, that's totally acceptable. I'm just curious about what your process looks like. Because I do, obviously, as an English teacher, have a pretty decisive opinion about what things you can do to help you with comprehension while you read and before you read. So we're going to talk about some of those strategies today, and then we're going to practice employing those strategies, and we're going to read through a text together, and then you'll practice on your own as one of your quiz questions. All right, so let's take a look on the screen. It says strategies for pre-reading. Now, obviously, the first one says set a purpose. Now, obviously, a lot of times, especially if it's in school, you're assigned a purpose. You know you're reading for a specific reason. So, for example, when I go to bed at night, I read my book for fun. And my purpose is really just to entertain and to relax. So I don't do, I just sit down and read for entertainment. If I was reading a newspaper article, I might be reading for information. So these are just some reasons we might be doing some reading: for information, entertainment, to be persuaded. All of these are reasons we might be reading. So the same is true as if you're an author. You have a specific purpose. Like, you're either reading to inform, persuade, or to entertain, right? Or writing to perform. Goodness, you're either writing to inform, entertain, or persuade. So you're doing the same thing when you're reading. So for us today, I've already determined our purpose. We're looking to determine central idea and to identify two supporting details. That is our purpose in reading today. The next step we would do is preview the text. And you probably do this a lot without recognizing that you do it. So, for example, if you preview the text, you're probably going to read the title. You're going to identify the name of the author. I always look through to see if there are any pictures that might help me make predictions about what's going to happen, if there are any captions to those pictures, if there are any bolded words if I'm reading for information, or if I'm reading out of a textbook. A lot of times they put those words on the side or in the margins. So I preview the text and identify those things. I'm going to skip to predict real quick, and then I'll do the activate background knowledge. Prediction, that goes along right here with preview the text. I think those kind of go hand in hand. And again, these are things we tend to do subconsciously sometimes. We'll read the title and be like, oh, I know what that's about. Or, oh, I think the title's alluding to this. And that's where activating background knowledge comes in. Our background knowledge is activated when we see something that we recognize, whether it's the name of the author, or maybe we've read something about that author before, or the title, we've recognized the title, or maybe we've heard it, or maybe we've read it 2 or 3 years ago and we don't really remember what it's about, but we bring some background information with us to the reading of the text. So then, while we read, I'm a person who, especially when I have the actual text in front of me, I like to write on it, use my highlighter, underline words, write in the margins. But when I'm reading on the computer, which is what we're going to be doing today, I do keep a list of words next, or a notebook paper next to me, and I make a list of words or moments in the text that I think are important. It doesn't matter if they end up being important or not, really. It's just things that stand out to me. What's the main character's name? What's the point of view of the story? Where is the setting? Things that I notice as I'm reading. And this will help me as I determine the central idea and identify 2 supporting details. It will help me if I have that information because I can go back and look at my notes. Otherwise, I'm kind of fishing through my brain trying to remember where that information was. So some of my during and post reading strategies, I'm going to cross check, which is what I'm talking about. I'm going to look for vocabulary words. I'm going to look for important moments in the story, identify the character, the setting, etc. I'm going to reread portions of the text that I think might be meaningful. So a lot of times I do that after I've read it one time. I go back and identify the moments in the text that I think are important and I reread them just to determine if I do need to remember them or if I don't, and if they do connect to what I think the overarching ideas of the story are. Confirm my predictions. Was I right? Was I wrong? How close was I? Connect background knowledge. You're going to do this as you read. Maybe you identify with an experience that a character in the story has gone through, etc. The last is review. You are going to review what you've written down, you're going to review what you've read, and you're going to come to an idea or a consensus about your purpose, which is, again, to determine the central idea and to identify 2 supporting details. All right, so let's take a look at this. We're going to take a look at this story, and we're going to read through it, and we're going to read through the story and identify what we think the central idea is or the important details of the story that help us determine that central idea. So maybe you've read this before. We're going to do our first pre-reading strategy, which is to preview the text. We're going to look at the title, Fish Cheeks. Okay, the title's Fish Cheeks. That doesn't tell me much. Maybe it's about a fish. Maybe it's about somebody who's got big cheeks. I don't know. I don't know what that title refers to, but it's interesting. And it's written by somebody named Amy Tan. And as I previewed the text, I'm going to scroll through and realize, oh, it's really not that long of a story. It's just a few paragraphs. And then the next thing I'm going to notice, because I can't really miss it, it's the first sentence, I'm going to identify that the first word is I. So I know already it's told in the first person perspective. These are the only things right now that I can bring with me to the text. Those are the only, there's no other markings on the story that I can bring with me to my reading. But as a reader, I have personally read stories by Amy Tan before. And you might have also either read this story or other stories by her in your past as well. So I can bring that with me to the reading of the story. All right, so as I read through this, and this is going to be one of your quiz questions in the quiz when you get there. So I highly encourage you to write down this information as we go through the story, so that you don't have to go back to the story later on. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give you the first word of your password, the first part of your password for your quiz. So I would like you to write this down too. So your first word of your 2-word password is pineapple. So you're going to write down the word pineapple, and when you get to take the quiz, that's going to be the first part of your password is pineapple. All right? All right, so we're going to go ahead and read this story real quick, and then we're going to talk about it at the end. All right, so the beginning of the story is, I fell in love with the minister's son the winter I turned 14. He was not Chinese, but as white as Mary in the manger. For Christmas, I prayed for this blonde-haired boy, Robert, and a slim new American nose. When I found out that my parents had invited the minister's family over for Christmas Eve dinner, I cried. What would Robert think of our shabby Chinese Christmas? What would he think of our noisy Chinese relatives who lacked proper American manners? What terrible disappointment would he feel upon seeing not a roasted turkey and sweet potatoes, but Chinese food? All right, so I'm going to stop right there because this is where I would start by taking notes. First of all, I would identify my perspective my point of view, my speaker is first person. So this person's telling a story from his or her point of view, right? Then I see that it's Christmas time. It's Christmas Eve. So I know that they're having dinner. It's Christmas Eve dinner. And then the next line, she says, "What would Robert think of our shabby Chinese Christmas?" That's right here. So that tells me what the heritage and the culture is of my speaker, which is an important element in this story. So I want to make sure that I take note of that and that I write that down in my notes. So I've identified a couple of things, a couple of details already that are going to help me lead me, at least I think at this point, to understanding the central idea of the story. On Christmas Eve, I saw that my mother had outdone herself in creating a strange menu. She was pulling black veins out of the backs of fleshy prawns. The kitchen was littered with appalling mounds of raw food, a slimy rock cod with bulging eyes that pleaded not to be thrown into a pan of hot oil, tofu, which looked like stacked wedges of rubbery white sponges, a bowl soaking dried fungus back to life, a plate of squid, their backs crisscrossed with knife markings so they resembled bicycle tires. And then they arrived, the minister's family and all my relatives, in a clamor of doorbells and rumpled Christmas packages. Robert grunted hello, and I pretended he was not worthy of existence. Okay, so I'm going to stop us again, and I'm going to identify some word choices here. The speaker uses words like strange to describe the menu. She says up here the word disappointment. She talks about the word littered. She says appalling. She uses words like slimy. So think about the connotation of these words. And the connotation of these words, what do they make you think of? Are they making you want to sit down and eat this dinner? Are they, what are they making you imagine in your head? They're not flattering words. So clearly, our speaker has some level of dismay and disappointment about the way her family's being presented to this boy Robert and his family. And then here at the very end, Robert grunted hello, and I pretended he was not worthy of existence. So my question here is, she pretended he was not worthy of existence. So what does that tell us about how our speaker feels about Robert? And what conclusion can we draw about what she wants him to feel about her, right? So what is why might she be so disappointed in the meal and this process that's happening right now on Christmas Eve? Okay, so the next page. Dinner threw me deeper into despair. There's another important word there, the word despair. My relatives licked the end of their chopsticks and reached across the table, dipping them into the dozen or so plates of food. Robert and his family waited patiently for platters to be passed to them. My relatives murmured with pleasure when my mother brought out the whole steamed fish. Robert grimaced. Then my father poked his chopsticks just below the fisheye and plucked out the soft meat. "Amy, your favorite," he said, offering me the tender fish cheek. I wanted to disappear. At the end of the meal, my father leaned back and belched loudly, thanking my mother for her fine cooking. "It's a polite Chinese custom to show you are satisfied," explained my father to our astonished guests. Robert was looking down at his plate with a reddened face. The minister managed to muster up a quiet burp. I was stunned into silence for the rest of the night. Okay, so again, I'm going to stop. Think about the tone of this piece here. What does our speaker feel in this moment? She feels embarrassed, right? She says, the beginning, my dinner threw me deeper into despair. That's an important number or important word choice. And then Robert grimaced. Then my father poked his chopsticks just below the fisheye, and she wanted to disappear. She was mortified this was happening in this moment. So I'm curious to think what this scene would have been like had Robert and his family not been there. She probably would have been happy to partake in this family tradition that's going on at the dinner table. So what has changed? Why is this boy being at the table changed her perception of what's happening around her? It's an important question. After everyone had gone, my mother said to me, "You want to be the same as American girls on the outside." She handed me an early gift. It was a miniskirt in beige tweed. But inside, you must always be Chinese. You must be proud you are different. Your only shame is to have shame. And even though I didn't agree with her then, I knew that she understood how much I had suffered during the evening's dinner. It wasn't until many years later, long after I'd gotten over my crush on Robert, that I was able to fully appreciate her lesson and the true purpose behind our particular menu. For Christmas Eve that year, she had chosen all my favorite foods. Okay, so now that we've made it through the text, all the way through, and I appreciate you sticking in there with me. It was definitely, it's a longer time to listen to me read for sure. What's our takeaway? What is our concept of our central idea here? This is a narrative piece. So this is an experience that Amy Tan, our author, went through as a child. So it's a narrative piece, narrative memoir piece, in the sense that it's based on her experience. And in this very end of the paragraph, she gives us, or in these last two paragraphs, she gives us her main idea, because she's reflecting on the experience that she's had. She's looking back on an experience and explaining what she learned from that experience. So I want you to think for a minute, what does she learn from that experience? She learns to be proud of who she is and where she comes from, not to allow shame to ever cloud over, again at least, who she has, what heritage she has and where she has come from. So if we look at that as our central idea, if we are going to take the central idea, I'm going to give us a clean whiteboard really fast. If we take the central idea of fish cheeks, be proud of who you are, right? And where you come from. So if this is our central idea, that she had to learn this kind of the hard way, to be proud of who she is and where she comes from, and that's what she's trying to put forth in her writing. Be careful of being shameful of it, right? So if we were to look back at the reading and think about what we read, what can we use to support this central idea? So I want you to think about that for a minute. We're gonna go over a couple, and then I'm gonna ask you to identify two different ones to include in your quiz response, because I'm curious what your thoughts are too. So I'm gonna look back through here, and I'm gonna identify a couple of things that help me with that understanding of be proud of who you are. Don't be afraid of where you come from. So the first part I'm gonna say here. Dinner threw me deeper in despair. My relatives licked the ends of their chopsticks and reached across the table. She had to learn this the hard way, that this was, something that she shouldn't turn away from, or that she should not be afraid to embrace, right? So if I am going to support my concept that she should be proud of who she is and not be afraid of where she comes from, I would say this part here would be my first one. And in my writing here, Amy witnesses her relatives experiencing joy, right? Not only is she experiencing joy, but she's embracing they are embracing the customs that come with their family, right? So, oh goodness. I just see with my typing, I did not get that right. So, okay. So, she witnessed her relatives experiencing joy at the dinner and embracing their customs. So, this is a lesson that she learns by the end of our story. But this is where I can support this concept that if we can see these people taking joy in their customs and experiencing that joy at the dinner, being all together. The second one is Amy's father belching. Can you imagine being at a dinner where that happened? Because it's not an American custom, right? So if we're sitting at a dinner and that happens, we'd kind of all be surprised. And you can kind of see here, my father explained to our astonished guests. He says it's a polite Chinese custom to show you are satisfied. So this family takes pride in their customs and they're sharing them with this other family. And I would use this as an example to show that the father, Amy's father, shows their guests what a custom, how the custom works where they're from, to show your guests that you are satisfied. So those would be two instances that I would say I can connect back to this central idea of be proud of who you are and where you come from. So what I'm going to ask you to do in your quiz when you take it, one of your questions will be to identify some supporting details. And I'm going to give you, in the quiz, there'll be a link to the document, to the story. So if you want to go back and look at it on your own, you can do that. But I want you to identify two more instances that are different from what I've put up here on the board today that show us that Amy's central idea is be proud of who you are and where you come from. And then there'll be something else in there for you to practice identifying central idea on your own. Again, let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to reach out to me if I can be of assistance in any way, or if you have any questions about this lesson. So I have to give you your second word, so hopefully you remember that first word in our password. So you're going to enter both words in your password section to take the quiz. So I told you what the first one was. The second one is the word star, S-T-A-R. So you hopefully remember your first word from earlier in the video, and your second word is star. That being said, I hope that you guys have a fantastic day. Thank you so much for hanging out and watching the video. Again, let me know if you have any questions.